Good evening. Good evening. My name is Joanne Robinson.
You're good.
Good evening. My name is Joanne Robinson. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of Peace Action and the Fundraising Committee. And I'd like to welcome you to our fourth virtual book party since the pandemic began. Our Board of Directors and the Fundraising Committee wishes to thank you for your loyal support during these trying times. Tonight's event was inspired by the 2021 William Sloane Coffin Jr. Peacemaker Award event theme, which was Athletes and Activism. Etan Thomas was an awardee. His newly published book, Police Brutality and White Supremacy, The Fight Against American Tradition. See the book? And for those of you interested in obtaining the book, we will provide the info for you in the chat. Again, thank you to Akasic Books for making this event possible. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, let me tell you a little about Peace Action New York State, PANIS. We are the New York State affiliate of Peace Action National, which is the largest grassroots peace organization in the United States with over 200,000 supporters. We were founded 65 years ago in 1957 as the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, SANE Freeze for short. We believe in abolishing war. Our mission is abolishing war, calling for diplomacy, the abolition of nuclear weapons, a culture of peace, and respect for human security. And this is what Peace Action of New York State is all about. We have 9 community chapters and 13 student chapters across the state who will carry out the legacy and vision of the peace movement into the years to come and the student associations who are our future. Today, we need peace action more than ever. With the current situation in the Ukraine, where charged language about nuclear weapons is a threat to everyone, everywhere, our hearts go out to the people of the Ukraine and all victims of violence. We are in solidarity with the peace activists in Russia and all over the world, calling for immediate cessation to our military action. It's not our military action, it's Russia's military action. I want to get that understood. At this time, I would like to introduce the president of Peace Action New York State, Jim Anderson. Jim, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Joanne, and greetings all, family, friends, simply family. It's indeed a pleasure to be here with our past honoree of the William Sloane Coffin Award and also in attendance, a co-honoree who is here, Ben Cohen. And it is great for us to have this very intersectional conversation that both Kevin and Etan will engage in. It connects not only history paths that is still happening, I should say tragic history paths that is still happening, to history now that is just as tragic, period. And what I also would like to say is that in this conversation, we will see that it still comes down, even as we say no justice, no peace, it still comes down to the fact that peace demands action. And that's not action by just the government, but that's action by we the people. So I'm gonna do like I hope all of you will, as we get a chance to listen to a great conversation between two great persons, more than authors, humanitarians in many ways. And this connection of police abuse here in the US that they will cite is definitely a connection to the international level of which we see police behavior playing out. And with that, I just will say, hey, the world is changing and we're gonna help change it. It is we, the people, climbing this hill together. Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you to our presenters tonight. And thank you to the team that pulled it all together. I get the easy part. They've done all the great work. I salute you all, and my prayers go out for all of us. Thank you, Joanne.
You're welcome. Next, I would like to introduce Emily Rubino, the Executive Director of Peace Action in New York State, who has raised the statue of Panis to both national and international levels. Emily?
Great. Thank you, Joanne. And thanks everyone for joining us here tonight. Etan, it's great to see you again. And Kevin, it's really wonderful to meet you. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think it's very timely to be having this event on the last day of Black History Month, because I think it just shows tonight's the start of the conversation. It's not the end of it. Black history isn't just a month. It's something that we should be talking about year round. White supremacy and police brutality are issues year round. And I think it's really important that we're having this conversation. And as we talk about not just, police brutality and militarism in the US, but global anti-Blackness, we're hearing stories of African students and Black people in Ukraine not being able to flee in the same way that their white counterparts are. So, I think anti-Blackness is really a global phenomenon that we have to push back against, and all of these issues are really interconnected. So I'm really glad we can be having this conversation tonight, and just really looking forward to shutting my mouth and listening and learning from you and your experiences. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you very much. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Peace Action. We are the New York State affiliate of Peace Action National, which is the largest grassroots peace organization in the United States with over 200,000 supporters. We were founded 65 years ago in 1957 as the Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy, Sane Freeze for short. We believe in abolishing war, the calling for diplomacy, the abolition of nuclear weapons, a culture of peace and respect for humanity. This is what Peace Action of New York State is all about. Our mission. We have 9 community chapters and 13 student chapters across the state who will carry out the legacy and the vision of the peace movement. The students are our future. And today we need peace action more than ever with the current situation in the Ukraine, where charged language about nuclear weapons is a threat to everyone, everywhere. Our hearts go out to the people of the Ukraine and all victims of violence. We in solidarity with the peace activists in Russia and all over the world, calling for an immediate cessation of military action.
So Joanne, now it's time to introduce Etan.
Yes.
And Kevin.
And I would like to introduce to Etan, and Etan he was our 2021 William Sloane Coffin awardee, and he's really a remarkable person. He's a former 11-year NBA player, was born in Harlem and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He has published multiple books, including We Matter, Athletes and Activism, and More Than an Athlete, Fatherhood Rising to the Ultimate Challenge, and Voices of the Future. Thomas received the 2010 National Basketball Players Association Community Contribution Award, as well as the 2009 Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Foundation Legacy Award, both honoring his advocacy for social justice. He is a senior writer for basketballnews.com and a regular contributor to The Guardian and The Undefeated. He can frequently be seen on MSNBC as a special correspondent and co-hosts a weekly show with David Ziran called The Collision, where sports and politics collide. Police, police, please listen to all the things you're going to hear from this fantastic young man this evening. Kevin Powell is one of the most acclaimed political, cultural, literary, and hip hop voices in America today. Kevin is a native of New Jersey, or I say of New Jersey or Jersey City, and raised by a single mother, and came up in extreme poverty, but managed to study at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, thanks to New Jersey's Educational Opportunity Fund. Kevin has gone on to be an author of 14 books, including his recent life, or late, I should say, and it is The Education of Kevin Powell, a life story of when he was coming up as a young man, a boy's journey into manhood. It's a critically acclaimed and brutally honest memoir about including his life, including his youth. In 2023, he will publish a biography of Tupac Shakur, the late rapper and controversial American icon. Kevin's writings have also appeared in CNN.com, Esquire, Ebony, the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, Rolling Stone, The Guardian, ESPN.com, and Vibe. He's a Vibe writer, interviewing such diverse public figures as Tupac Shakur and Colin Powell. This is some biography for these young men to have achieved such greatness at such a young age. Thank you, gentlemen. The floor is yours. The screen is yours. Begin.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to the Peace Action New York State and to everyone out there. We really appreciate you all taking the time. I just want to make it clear, I'm really excited to interview Etan Thomas tonight. He's one of our brilliant thinkers in this country, prolific author, scholar. I had the pleasure of interviewing him actually for the Tupac Shakur book that I'm working on. It's one of the best interviews that I've gotten for the book, and I've interviewed over 150 people. And I've been a fan of his and admirer of Etan since he was in college at Syracuse University as a great basketball player. But more importantly, like folks who came before him, Paul Robeson and Bill Russell, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Jim Brown, a number of folks, Muhammad Ali. Etan is someone who is not just an athlete, far more than an athlete. In addition to being an athlete, is someone who has great love and concern for humanity and for justice and truth telling. And so I'm just happy to be sitting here as the person that's going to talk about this book, Police Brutality and White Supremacy: The Fight Against American Traditions, which includes original interviews with Steph Curry, Fred Hampton Jr., Chuck D, Isaiah Thomas, Sue Bird, Jake Tapper, Jamil Hill, Tim Wise, a range of people. And Etan, I just want to jump into it because I want to talk and listen, but the first and foremost, why the title? Why now? Why this book?
Well, first, it's definitely an honor always to speak with you. I always tell a story sometimes about how, when I spoke out against the war in Iraq, you reached out to me. You didn't know me, I knew who you were, but we didn't know each other. And you just offered me some words of advice. And, you told me what's about to happen, the criticism that you're about to go into, the backlash that you're about to receive. And I really wasn't aware of any of that. So I really appreciate you reaching out to me the way that you did. But yeah, this book is really a deeper dive into my previous book, which was We Matter, Athletes and Activism. I wanted to put something together and encourage athletes to continue using their voices to speak out on the injustices that were going on around the country, because there was this resurgence of athletes using their voices. It was kind of quiet for a little while, and then, post Kaepernick, there was this big resurgence. So I wanted to take in We Matter, I went back to interview some of the people who I grew up.
Oh no, did we lose Etan? Etan, just give us a second,
Yeah,
folks.
yeah, maybe it's just frozen for a minute. See.
Just bear with us, everyone. Sometimes technology happens.
Everything like that. So it was really an amazing experience. So with this book, I wanted to take a deeper dive into the subject of racism, of police brutality, of white supremacy, and really started off all the way from from the beginning, and interviewed a lot of different people. We looked at different events, and like say one chapter was just about the Rodney King verdict, and I went back to me being in the middle school, and what was going on around there. Then we went to the Central Park Five. Then we went to, I really wanted to capture a lot of different voices dealing with this subject. So that's why I wanted to tackle this topic.
And for folks, since we are talking about Black History Month, and this is the last day of Black History Month officially, February 28th, but I love the cover, because this is a historic, iconic image that you imitated. Can you talk about it or replicate it? Can you talk about the image and what made you decide to use this image with
Sure,
you
sure,
as
sure.
you?
Right, sure. I pay homage to Huey P. Newton. When I first read about him, I was around in middle school, and learning about the Black Panthers, learning about the 10-point program, of them feeding the, in the neighborhood, the breakfast programs, everything that they were doing. I was just enamored by it, of everything about them, of what they did and how they wanted to, protect the community, and looking at what was going on with police brutality and how there was nobody there to police the police. I mean, it was an amazing phenomenon that they just swept through the country, and the amount of a threat that they were to the powers that be. And I wanted to just pay homage. So in my previous book, We Matter, I paid homage to Malcolm X with the cover, and in this one, I wanted to definitely pay homage to Huey P. Newton.
And Etan, if you could do me a favor, if it's possible, can you get a little bit closer to your microphone so we can hear you as clearly as possible? And
Sure.
Yes, please. And we're recording this, so we want to just make sure everyone gets this for posterity,
Sure,
not just for tonight.
How about this? Is it a little better?
Yeah, is it echoey, Sally Jones? Is it cool?
That's good.
Okay. Thank you, Etan.
No
And
problem.
so you interviewed, my gosh, a lot of people in this book. I mean, you got Mark Cuban in here, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, you've got former police officers.
Right.
Talk about the range of people. Why did you decide to get a range of people for the book, and what interviews actually stand out for you that you did for this book?
Well, I wanted to get a range for a lot of different reasons. There's some people who, and so I interviewed a lot of white people for the book. I have a whole section of white privilege, and I only interviewed white people for that section. And I did that intentionally because, as I was going through different, colleges and universities, I saw that a lot of different people, their ears automatically close when they hear the words white privilege. Like they take offense, and and it changes the whole tone. I'm like, well, let me see how you react to white people talking about white privilege. So talking to people like Tim Wise, to Sue Bird, Rex Chapman, and they really broke down the elements of white privilege that exists in society. So I wanted to get a diverse group of people to be able to discuss it. It's interesting. People look at some of the names. I was like, Jake Tapper from CNN. What's he doing in your book? I was like, well, I wanted to get his voice as well, because after the January 6th insurrection, he was a voice that was challenging a lot of the other media and how they were covering it. So I wanted to get his voice as well. But I think that there's a value in having a lot of different types of voices from a lot of different types of backgrounds in a project like this, because you have different experiences and you have a different audience that would hear you. So some of the people who might hear one person wouldn't hear the other person. So that's why it's good to do that.
You start the book by talking about the trial of the police officers who brutalized Rodney King, and you talk about the Central Park Five. How did those events shape you as a young person? Because you were a youth when all of this happened. We're talking about Rodney King. Central Park Five was 1989, 1990. Rodney King was 91, 92. Obviously, the LA Rebellion exploded in April of 92. Take us back to who you were and what you felt when those things happened.
Well, I was young, just kind of interpreting what was going on around me. So in the book, I talked about, I went back to my childhood of being young and looking around and seeing everything. But then I wanted to talk to people directly impacted by those events. So I spoke to Rodney King's daughter, Miss Laura Dean King, and it was amazing, the stuff that she taught.
Oh my, he froze again. Just give us a second, you all. Technology is wonderful when it works, isn't it? It'll work
Right.
again. It'll work again. Yeah.
Especially live.
Yes, yes, yes. And we were all on early to test everything. Everything was beautiful. Just 1 second. He'll come back
He
again.
walked me through everything. Raymond Santana was amazing. I mean, I didn't think that he was gonna, give as much detail as he did, in his interview, because it's, a traumatic experience. If anybody saw When They See Us, it was a really traumatic experience that those, 5 young brothers went through. But he detailed everything in the interview, and it was just amazing. But sometimes you do interviews and the words kind of jump off the page, like you can't kind of stop reading it, and that's what his interview specifically was. But yeah, those are tough to do.
What are the lasting impressions, and what are the conversations you had with your family, your mom, about this as a young Black man, as a youth coming up? Like, what were the things that were said to you?
Well, that's when my mother would have to have the talk with me. Or my grandparents would have the talk with me when I was in Harlem, after the Central Park 5. I mean, I remember it so vividly. My grandmother just being upset when Trump, called for the death penalty of them, and she was, saying that it's he's putting a bullseye on all the Black and brown kids all around the neighborhood. Growing up in Harlem, I was writing Spanish Harlem, and that's exactly what it did. My mother talking to me about after the Rodney King video came out, and the different rules that applies to us. And the thing about it is, I was tall for my age. So while I might have only been 9 or 10 years old, I looked like I was a teenager just because of my height. So nobody looked at me like a 9 or 10-year-old. So I had to go by the rules. I couldn't do sudden movements. I had to, see, I remember my grandmother saying, look, you always like to stand with your hands in your pocket. If you ever, the police ever come up to you, don't have your hands in your pockets. Have your hands where you can see them, and make sure that you don't make any sudden movements. I mean, it's those type of things are things that, a lot of white America don't really understand, because it's not their world. It's not their fault. It's just not their world. But as Black parents, we immediately have to teach that to our children at a very young age. So I went back to that time period when my mom and my grandparents and my dad used to have to teach me, how to survive in America as a young Black man.
What did talking to retired police officers teach you about policing, if anything? Like, what did you learn from that experience? And what were your perceptions before the conversations, the interviews for the book, and what happened after?
Well, so after the previous book, We Matter, I started doing a lot of different programs around the country, and I would involve police officers. So listening to them over and over, at these different functions, at these different things, I'm like, well, they're making this so much as being anti-police if you talk about police brutality, but they understand exactly what we're talking about. A lot of police officers want to have accountability just like we do, because it makes their jobs easier. The problem is that when you start talking about funding being different, that's always where it gets a little hazy. But talking to the police officers, they see the same problems we have. But hearing their voices in there, from the inside, and they're talking about it, gives it a little bit more weight at certain times, because a lot of people will go around thinking, well, we don't understand how it really works, and they have the bad apple theory, or they have the it's not all, and you have these police officers saying, no, it's a bad setup. You know what I mean? That the setup is bad, because you have this and this, you have qualified immunity, you have unions that are only supposed to be able to protect police officers whether they're right or wrong. Not only when they're right, they protect them when they're wrong. And that's a huge problem with the unions that we have. So when they're saying that, it resonates a lot differently with mainstream America.
I want to come back to the concept of white privilege, because it seems that a lot of people still either don't understand it, or they're offended when it's brought up, or don't understand what allyship means. You spoke to folks like Rex Chapman, Sue Bird, other folks, other white folks, other sisters and brothers, other folks in the family, the human family, if we will. What did you get out of that conversation around white privilege?
Well, they're talking about their experiences. And, Sue Bird said that a lot of white people get offended as if, they automatically say, well, I didn't come from money. And she said, well, that has nothing to do with coming from money. They're like, well, I worked hard. It's like, okay, you could have worked hard, but there still are things that happen in society that didn't happen to you because of the fact that you're white, that would happen to somebody else because they're Black. And she's talking about those experiences and being around her teammates and learning things that she didn't know. You know, Cal Corver was very honest about, you know, he was like, yeah, I've been around Black teammates my whole life, but there are certain things that they have to go through that I don't have to go through. Certain things when the police come up, you know, I don't automatically tense up. I have no, you know, there's no feeling of, you know, introspective, you know, did I do anything wrong? Am I looking? There's no feeling like that. My Black teammates have it, whether and they didn't do anything wrong at all, you know. And it's the response of hearing them say it makes people listen differently. You know, hearing Stan Van Gundy talk about it, you know, it's different. It's something where, you know, Fred Hampton Jr., who I also interviewed, and he always echoed what his father was always pushing, which was bringing different races and cultures together to fight on one cause. And, you know, with this book, I wanted it to be a reflection of that, of having different races, different perspectives, different you know, backgrounds together on a cause that we share, which is, you know, defeating racism, white supremacy, and police brutality. And so having those different voices like that, they all definitely play a special role in this topic.
You have a section. What I love about this book, you have sections covering pretty much all of the American quote unquote traditions. You have this section of stories about Christianity and the way it's been entangled in quote unquote American traditions. I guess the question for me is, how do you, you're Christian, am I right?
Yes.
You know, how do you navigate and how do you rectify your religious practice, your spiritual practice, with the way that the religion has been practiced inside of this so-called American tradition?
Definitely. Great question. You know, so in this chapter, I interviewed Christians about this. I interviewed Steph Curry, interviewed Chris Broussard, interviewed Bishop Talbot Swan. And we all talked very honestly about the way that Christianity was used to implement, to support white supremacy, the way it was used to justify slavery, and how it was used. We also went back to, you know, a lot of times people say, well, you know, what religion were we before we were slaves? And we go back to the history. Well, there was Christianity in Africa prior to slavery. But the part of is that, you know, American slavery twisted and contorted Christianity and weaponized it. And we laid out the way it was weaponized. So from then up to now, where you see the white evangelicals weaponizing Christianity. So you'll read, you know, sometimes when you hear current evangelicals speaking, you're like, are you reading from the same Bible? Like that's not what it says at all. Those weren't the teachings of Jesus at all. Like you creating something completely different. So we're talking about that aspect of it. And it's an aspect that, for one, made a lot of people uncomfortable because they didn't want to recognize exactly what happened. It's not reinventing history. It's telling the accuracy of what happened. This is what happened. Yes, Jesus was changed to where it described him in the Bible to looking like you know, a surfer guy with blonde hair and blue eyes and white skin. Yes, that's what happened. There was a reason why it was changed. There was a reason why, you know, so we went through that whole part. And a lot of people you know, were that chapter has a lot of strong responses because many people haven't heard it explained and broken down that way by Christians. That's the difference, by Christians. So that, you know, I definitely wanted to have that chapter in there because it's an important part of, you know, the prevalence of white supremacy in this country.
Now, amongst all the folks that you have in the book, activists, athletes, thinkers, you have Jake Tapper in the book. Why is that?
So I mentioned a little bit before. So I'm watching the January 6th insurrection.
Yeah.
I'm watching it happen live. And I talked about, you know, sitting there with my family and we're watching it live and we can't believe what we're actually seeing like everybody else in the world. And, I'm looking at the news coverage, and I'm looking at the language that a lot of news people were using. And they were saying with these Trump, protesters, these people who are upset with the results, these people and I'm like, that's how they're describing him? And I heard Jake Tapper calling them out like, no, these are white supremacists. This is domestic terrorism. This is how it should be described. And he was like the only one doing it for a while on those networks. And so I reached out to him and asked him, and he was like, no, yeah, I know what you mean. There was a lot of people, doing that. So I asked him if I can interview him for this book, and we just took a deeper dive into it. And we talked about how the media's role and what the role that the media had in what happened on January 6th, allowing a lie to keep going, to inviting people on their programs that they know are lying, and creating an atmosphere that is like, gathering the troops for violence, and the irresponsibility that was taking place for the media to do that. This is all Jake Tapper saying all this. So, I haven't really heard people in mainstream news really speaking like that. And he got a lot of backlash for it, but he was absolutely telling the truth.
I need to ask this question. Are there, without saying names of people, are there folks who said, I would really love to say something, but I can't say it on the record? And did they say why they couldn't say it on the record and be in this book?
I didn't hear that as much. I did hear from people who, because I reached out to a lot of different people on Fox News, and I wanted to get some of their, thoughts. And I have no problem debating anybody from Fox News. I mean, you'll see in the Mark Cuban interview, we're pretty much debating most of the time. I have no problem debating someone, and they didn't want to do it. And I was interested in saying, well, why don't you want to do it? Like you go on Fox News and you have your position every single day. Like, why wouldn't you want someone to, have a difference and challenge you, and we just talk about it and go through? And, in my opinion, they know what they're saying is a lie. And we're talking about on this topic of January 6th. They know the role that they played. They know what they allowed to happen. They know what they pushed, the agendas that they pushed. You know what I mean? They know. It's not denied. It's not like we can't roll back the tape and show where Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly, where all of them have done. We can roll back the tape. But, there's a reason why Malcolm X said, even back in the 60s, that the media is the most powerful entity on earth. I'm paraphrasing, but he said they have the power to control the minds of the masses. And that's absolutely correct. And that exists just as well today as it did back in 1960.
There's a section in the book, Defund the Police. And obviously that has been, I don't really like the word controversial. I think that's been a powerful statement and sentiment of a lot of people in our communities around the country here in America. Well, why did you decide to have a chapter called Defund the Police? And how do you respond, part two, to, so-called Democrats or liberals or even progressives are like, hey, that's going to sabotage our agenda if we put that term or act on defund the police? Can you respond, please?
So in that chapter, I interviewed a brother named Corey McCoy, and he is the brother of William McCoy. And to tell you the quick story, his brother William McCoy was asleep in the parking lot of a Taco Bell in Vallejo, California. The person inside the Taco Bell called the police and said, I want to ask for a wellness check because there's somebody sleeping in the parking lot. They're non-responsive, and we just want to make sure that they're okay. That's what the call said. The police then came with guns, approached it like he was, some kind of an enemy target, and just unloaded like 50 shots into him. 13 of them killed him. And so my contention is the police should never have been called in that situation in the first place. There should be another group who are trained to be able to handle and deal with wellness checks, because that's what it was. There was no need. There was no threat of violence, no imminent danger, nothing like that. It was a wellness check. And so we see that happen over and over again. I also interviewed later on in the book, Tatiana Jefferson's sister. If you just tell you briefly what happened with them is that, she left her back door open in Dallas, Texas. And the neighbor called for, again, a wellness check to see if his neighbor is okay because the back door was open. Well, the police came with guns. They're yelling through the outside in the backyard, and they shoot into the house and kill her through the window. And she's in her house. So you see these situations happen over and over again, and you talk to police and they tell you, well, listen, we are not trained to handle these situations, mental health crisis and wellness checks. So if you're only trained, and this is, I interviewed Mark Lamont Hill for this chapter, and he made a great reference. I'm gonna keep using it because it was a great analogy. He said, if you're only trained to handle everything with a hammer, then everything is gonna look like a nail to you. And so with that in mind, why would they get the funding to handle a situation that they're not trained for? So I don't really care what you call it. If you don't like the word defund the police, it doesn't. If you want, you can call it whatever you want to, but that funding should go to another entity that is trained to handle that situation, a mental health situation or a wellness check, and then you wouldn't have all of these tragedies happen. And when there was no imminent threat and no violence and no weapon, no anything like that, because it continuously happens over and over again. But that's common sense thing. That's something that should be an easy fix in the way that we police. But again, the problem is when you talk about, taking away the funds, then they're like, oh, so we're going to have less funds. Then no, we just want to keep our funds, even though we're not trained to deal with the situation. And it's like, okay, well, then you're just being greedy because that you're not trained for it, but you still want the funding as if you were trained for it. And that's a major problem right now.
It makes me think of that joke that Chris Rock said in one of his stand-ups where, there'll be this excuse that there's just a couple of bad apples on a particular police force. And Chris Rock said, imagine if we had a couple of bad apples as airline pilots, what would happen to planes falling out of the sky over and over again?
Right.
Etan, I got to ask this question because I love listening to you. Peace Action New York State is our partners for this program tonight. What does the word peace mean to you? Given all you've been saying so far, what does the word peace mean to you at this stage in your life? Oh no, he froze again. Okay, give us a second.
Yeah.
He'll come back and maybe he'll be. Hey, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I didn't hear your question. It paused for a little while.
Okay, I was saying, given that Peace Action New York State is our partner for this event, I just would like to hear, what does the word peace mean to you, given the work that you've committed your life to doing in terms of truth telling and dealing with all these injustices and honestly a lot of violence all around us?
Well, peace is justice. It's not dealing with injustice peacefully. That's not what justice is. That's not what peace is. It's the actual presence of justice. And that's what everyone should strive for. It's not about being anti-police. It's anti-police brutality, which everybody should be anti-police brutality. Who should be for police brutality? But I think it's very important that, you have, justice. And it's not a matter of having injustice and dealing with it peacefully. And that's a lot of times what it's called, after we have a tragedy happen.
I know we touched on January 6th, the insurrection from last year. I just want to get a little bit more about what you thought about the event. And in general, we're hearing about the possibilities of who running again in 2024. What is your feeling about just the state of the country after doing this book and just what you've observed? You've been a witness to many things over the last several years. How are you feeling, and where's the hope for you, if there's hope?
Well, it's interesting. I talked to Jamel Hill about that topic here, and of course, she got in trouble for calling who, as you framed, a white supremacist when she was with ESPN.
Right.
And I asked her, I was like, well, didn't he kind of prove himself to be exactly what you called him? And she was like, yeah, I think it's kind of hard to really, especially after January 6th, it's hard to really dispute that. And the problem is that he plays to the feelings of a lot of people in mainstream America. And that's when I even asked Jake Tapper about it. I asked him, what does that say to you about where we are in this country, that this person could possibly run again and could possibly even win again? So going back, what does it say that even worked the first time? He had no political experience. He had no real plans. He had no real, he said he was going to build a wall and all of Mexico is going to pay for it. You know, that was his big slogan, make America great again, referring to the time when during either slavery or during segregation. Those are the only two times he was referring to. I mean, it was amazing that it worked the way that it did, but the fact that it did work kind of tells you where we are as a society. Because remember, after Obama, we were supposed to be in post-racial America. You know, remember they kept saying that? They kept saying, oh, well, we have a black president now. We're in post-racial America. And that couldn't be furthest from the truth. And I think You Know Who was an example that showed exactly where we are.
You know, you end the book with a poem to your son, Malcolm. Am I right?
Oh, a poem from my son. That was his.
I'm sorry, by your son. Pardon me. And the poem is titled, "What do you see when you look at me? What do you see when you look at me? A threat, a menace, or a human being?" And it's a long poem. It's a powerful poem. How old is Malcolm?
He's 16 now.
He's 16. Wow. Why did you include that poem in your book? What made you decide to do that?
So, you know, since he was little, I always have him involved in my events. The same thing I do with his sisters. You know, they have them involved. So you remember when we did the panel in New York after, Eric Garner was killed. He was young then. I think he was like 9, and he did the poem. I think the poem was "My Daddy," and he did the poem there during the event. You know, so I always have him kind of involved in it and coming to the different events, watching the discussions, hearing this, everything that is going on. And he wanted to write a poem for my book. And I showed him the manuscript before, and I gotta say,
Oh my, I gotta say is where he stopped.
Go back.
Etan, calling Etan. The Zoom.
Be happy.
what exactly?
Oh, good.
Oh, it keeps going out?
Yeah.
Yeah, this.
You left off at "I gotta say," and I'm not sure what you said after that. Can you recall?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll say I gotta say, he did a good job of really capturing a lot of the themes that I went through in the book. We talked about what do you see when you look at him, like that concept of how society is going to view you, and it doesn't matter how you view yourself. When you're stopped by the police, nothing else matters. A lot of times people say that, okay, well, you're in a different situation. You played ball for 11 years, you have money, you live in I was like, well, that doesn't save me when I get stopped by the police. And Malcolm sees that. Like, we actually have had situations where we have been stopped. And I have to do the whole, keep my hands visible. They ask for license registration. I have to stay still and still say, okay, I'm going to reach into my glove compartment and get my registration that you just asked me for. Is that okay? And then when they say yes, slowly go there. You know what I mean? But he's seen me have to do that. He's seen the intense situation. So, it's hearing that from a young person's perspective, is just a powerful thing to hear, because it's not the way that it should be. It's not, from a teenager to hearing a young people have those thoughts, that's not the way it should be, but it unfortunately is the way that it is in this society as a person of color.
I want to stay with this for a second, Etan. Can you talk about the trauma of having to live, no matter who you are, if you happen to be in Black skin? What is the trauma, the psychological effect of it, from generation to generation on us, do you feel?
Oh, there was a series called They. I don't know if you saw that, but it really depicted the trauma and made it into a horror film. It was from Key and Peele, one of them that do the horror, but the same one that did Get Out.
Oh, Jordan Peele, yes, absolutely.
Peele, right. So he did that. It was called Them. It might have been called Them, but it was amazing the way that he depicted exactly how that trauma is, and it's in different circumstances, having to be able to have to navigate through a situation where you're treated like a monster, but you have to act a certain way because you know that the person in charge of the situation has all the power in the situation. They have the gun or the stun gun or the whatever else. They have all of that in their possession, but they're the ones who are afraid of you. Like, that's traumatizing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's traumatizing to have to be able to make yourself non-threatening when the only thing that made you threatening in the first place was the color of your skin. And to have to do that in front of your children. Like, all of that's traumatizing. All of this is stuff that white people can't begin to understand because, again, it's not their world. But it's literally every day for us. And that's the part where creating the empathy where you can say, okay, even though this is not my world, it's still wrong that it's anybody's world. And that's what you want to create with white America. Then you create allies and you create accomplices of people who are willing to, lay it on the line to say, no, we need this to be changed because it's not right that this happens to anybody. And that's what I really want to push for, this book to be able to accomplish.
The book is called Police Brutality and White Supremacy, The Fight Against American Traditions. We're listening to Etan Thomas. Thank you. This has been an incredible conversation. I know we're going to open it up. Are you okay with taking questions?
Yes, but before taking questions, we have a special treat for you.
Yes, that's right. Pardon. Thank you. Thank you, Etan. Thank you, Ms. Robinson.
Definitely.
And we have a very special treat for you. We're going to go through that Q&A, but this surprise, that if you ride the subways of New York, we have wonderful artists who perform. And tonight we have a special performance from Eddie and the Next Stop Musician. Our own Sally Jones, when she was riding the subway just a few days ago, discovered them, and she was really impressed by them, and she heard them, underground group, and she was so enthused that she asked them if they would perform at this evening's virtual book party. So I asked Eddie, take it away. Eddie Bellis from Next Stop, our subway performers, underground subway performers. Eddie, you ready?
Unmute myself. Okay, but you gotta start my video.
He'll be with us in just a minute.
Hello? Am I muted?
No, you're good. You're good.
All right, greetings everyone in the name of the Most Highest. I just want to thank the brothers for putting out, such great literature into the world. Because, whenever we can have conversations like this, that's when we start spreading, awareness, in any different kind of forms. I stand before you, today, as a father that's, going up against the system. I had my newborn baby stripped away from me from Long Island Jewish Hospital. It's been 2 years. I don't know where my baby is at. And they also took my 4-year-old son, Shiloh O'Shea. So with a heavy heart, I'm saying, and still, knowing that we have to be the change that we want to see in the world, even when we're going through, I'm saying, no matter what we're going through in this life. The only person that we can really start a change with ourselves. So while I fight, I'm saying, and I hope for my baby, I'm saying, who was legally kidnapped by the system, I go out there, every single morning, and I try to encourage others to stay positive, because I could easily turn saying, flip the script the other side and be someone that is very angry and mad at the system and going out there and do something crazy. But I know that it's about our energy, and it's about, I'm saying, being the change that we want to see. So I start off with this song with listen. Come next week, I matter, you matter, we all do matter. Stop fighting each other. We all gotta get it together. I'm brown, you white. We all must find some peace of mind. Don't even matter what you try. The world is getting crazier. Some people have no conscience. They kill you over money quick. and still don't have no damn sense. For it should be a crime to judge a book by the cover. Open up and read new perspective you might soon discover. It's so sad and heartbreaking, many dying over minor things. But when you're looking at a greater scheme, everybody just wanna win. Don't even matter what you say. Every man deserves his own space. But let me set the record straight, it's only one human race. Yeah. I matter, you matter, we all do matter. Stop fighting each other, we all gotta get it together. I'm brown, you white, we all must find some peace of mind. Don't even matter what you try. One of this day, there'll be no more fighting, no more crying. One of this day, one of this day, one of this day, it's gonna be a brighter day, a brighter day. Behind every dark cloud, the sun is always shining. Somewhere in the sky, every time I feel down and disappointed, some tells me I should smile. So you gotta keep keeping on, always think positive. One day, I know we could all achieve peace of mind, make it much lighter. Sunny day, let's all play together. I feel it inside my soul, thinking about people just living in love, yeah, loving one another. One of this day, one of this day, yeah, it's gonna be a brighter day, a brighter day. One more time. One of this day, one of this day, it's gonna be a brighter day, a brighter. Check it out.
Now every day is like a movie. Matter of fact, it's like a movie. Concrete jungles, cage bird sings the woozy. Mama's on the phone calling on Tyrone, eyes watering. Little Sammy won't come home, but little does she know, little Sammy got stopped. Reaching to his pockets, little Sammy got shot. Adrenaline rushes as he sped down the street.
One blow to the back, knocking right off his feet.
But you would have thought them boys would have stopped. You would have thought they might have had a heart. Rush to the body in the blink of an eye. Pull the clock back, continue to take nine. And mama's home crying cause the fight they had kicked them out when she found weed in his bag. Says all she wants is for her baby to come home. Her hands start to shake when she hears the ring tone.
But one of this day, one of this day, it's gonna be a brighter day, a brighter day, yeah. One of this day, one of this day, it's gonna be a brighter day.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you, Eddie. And please
Thank
say
you.
your name. Sorry,
I'm
Miss.
the giver. I'm the
Thank you so much. When you said, like every parent fears when their black male son goes out, is he going to come home whole or alive? And then you said there's only one human race. We've all got together, got to get together, loving one another. Thank you. That's so beautiful. And getting back to Kevin and to Etan, it was interesting.
Etan.
Can you hear me?
Etan.
Yeah.
And getting back to Kevin and Etan, it was interesting.
Etan.
He's trying to tell you how to say my name right. It's Etan.
Etan, excuse me. I'm sorry, Etan. I'm sorry, Etan. Excuse me, Etan. It was just wonderful to hear you both. And when you talked about police brutality, when you talked about the culture of the police, and one of the questions I'd like to ask you is, it's very interesting when you talked about the allegiance to the blue or black, and that conflict for black policemen or even white policemen. And the other question is, when they talk about training, they get trained, but then when they go to the streets, they have a different attitude. They figure they have to follow street language and street talk and street lines. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, no, those are straight from the police officers that I interviewed. So Captain Sonia Pruitt, who was the first black captain here in Montgomery County in Maryland, she was the one who was talking about if you have to sometimes choose if you're going to be black or blue. And she talked about, being in different situations where she saw different police officers doing something that wasn't right, and her having to, feel the need to be able to go and stand out and say, wait, no, this is not right. Like, why are you doing this to this man who's handcuffed? Like, why are you, and you have to make that choice. But she explained how many times it's a difficult choice for one being black and then for another being a black woman. So, she talked from that aspect, and, it was a very honest discussion, a very honest, admission of the roles of what her interview was really going into what it means to be a black police officer, seeing all of this going on around you. Really powerful interview. And the other interview was talking about what you referenced, the training. And so a lot of they talk about the training that was being done, and that was by the officer who was he was a former VP of the police union, and he talked about the training and what you're trained when you go into the academy, or what do they have, or what is it called, when they first start their training process, and they say, okay, this is what what is on paper, and then this is what you have to do in the street. And he talked about how he was like, wait, this is wrong. Like and that's the part where, they're challenging. They talk about the uphill battle of challenging, because a lot of times people say, well, why don't the good cops just say about, point out the bad cops if they do something wrong? It's deeper than that, because it's a bad setup. It's a bad system. You know what I mean? So if the system put in place enables cops who are bad to be able to do certain things, then there is no turning in a bad cop, because the system will protect the bad cop. Do you know what I mean? So
yes, how do we change that?
yes, how do we change that? And he talked about, ending qualified immunity, having it where the police don't investigate themselves. Like they went through tangible solutions. So a lot of times when you have this topic, people say, oh, well, like they say like it's this big complicated thing that is so, tough to be able to do. And he was like, no, it's not that complicated. There's few things that you have to adjust, and you hold police officers accountable. And it's not like a slap on the wrist, and then other people will follow suit. The problem right now with qualified immunity is basically they have a license to do what they want to. And that's the number one thing that all the police officers say need to change, is qualified immunity.
Becomes a tradition. And now it's Q&A. For those of you who have questions, you put in the chat, or you may ask them. Raise your hand, and our techie, Sally or Madam Crothers, will help you and mute you when you're asking your question. The floor is open to those of you who have questions to either Etan, or Kevin. I give you that. See, white pronunciation. Etan, British. Etan.
Sally,
Okay.
hey Sally.
Okay, I'll raise my hand. I have a question. I was in a program Sunday where there was a discussion about what people were saying. Well, I'm not racist. I don't think I'm racist. And someone on the in our group said, it's not really about whether you're racist or not, or it's, are you anti-racist? And I was wondering if that term, what that meant to you, and if you could explain it.
Definitely. So I opened up each chapter with a quote, and I think that quote is from Angela Davis. And she said, it's not enough to just not be racist, but you have to be actively against racism or anti-racist. And I think that's true. A lot of times when you're having this discussion, a lot of people in mainstream America will say, oh, this doesn't apply to me because I'm not racist. I have black friends. I have, I like to, watch black people on TV. I love watching LeBron play. And they say, oh, and it's amazing. I'm laughing about it, but I really hear those responses. And it's like, you're like, you realize that has nothing to do with anything, right? and it's hopefully from hearing the stories of this impacted families in the book, and hearing police break down the changes that need to be made, and the history of how racism systemically has been set up in this country. Not just if one person doesn't like the other person, but systems put in place, that will change a lot of people's opinions, and they'll realize how, we have to all work together to change this, dismantle those things that were put in place in order to be against racism as a whole.
Etan, before someone else asks a question, just real quick, and hey, is it Uma? Am I saying it correctly? You're muted.
Yes.
Just give me 1 second, please. I just had a quick follow-up question for Etan. You mentioned history, which I think is so important. Why is there such a resistance, in your opinion? You've been on the lecture circuit, you've been around the country, you've been around the world. Why is there such a resistance in America to understanding history holistically?
Oh, very simple. Because Tim Wise broke this down in the book. He said because white supremacy is taught in history, and that's the way it's been implemented. He talked about how white people are told that they're superior from kindergarten. He said, so imagine being told that there was a whole civilization and a whole, on a whole continent, but they didn't really matter until your people came there. And then you discovered the place, even though there were people living there with a whole, civilization, but it didn't even matter yet. And, he talked about how from that story of Christopher Columbus tells white people how special they are and how important they are and how superior they are. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse from there. He said, so the reason why you're seeing this backlash, from CRT and teaching a lot, what real history happened is because, you have revisionist history that is a part of white supremacy, of changing what happened. It all works in together. So yeah, no, it's really interesting how this is going. But Tim Wise, that interview really broke down, from an educational standpoint, the issue of why, they don't want to teach real history. It's a great interview. Great interview.
And this is in your book,
Yeah.
Police Brutality and White Supremacy, to Fight Against American Traditions. Uma, and then is it Rudine, or is that correct pronunciation? Uma, then Rudine, please, your questions. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to us today. My question, I guess, is a little far-fetched, but it got me thinking just how a lot of how media is just tied to money. So certain narratives are reinforced constantly because of the attachment to money and these corporations. And then now what we're seeing is so beautiful with cryptocurrency is that 44% of people of color are investing in cryptocurrency, and it levels the playing field where it's a decentralized system where it doesn't matter what skin color you are, what your background is. It has just been a place to get money and, be able to exist in a society that's just so already unequal. And I just my question was just this is something that is just gaining a lot more momentum. And my question is what are your thoughts and your opinions on it? And I just read this article that said why Bitcoin is a tool for social justice, and I can add it to the chat. But I just think it's interesting because to look at alternative ways of gaining equality rather than following the structure that is designed to be unequal, and just looking for alternatives. And just what are your thoughts on that? So I don't know if I explained myself well.
I definitely understand what you're saying. Financial independence and economic independence doesn't always equal equality and equal justice. And for athletes have achieved financial independence. Athletes are paid very well, but then you have athletes that'll tell you that doesn't save them when they're stopped by the police, or when they walk into a store, or and that's the part that is tough, because it's like, okay, what do I have to do in order for you to see me as a human being or equal to you? It's not a college degree. I have my degree. It's not my bank account. It's not my, what. Then you start doing the tricks. So is it the way that I speak? Is it the way that I dress? Is it my hair? Is it? And none of that matters. It's the color of your skin. So that's the part that is the tough part. But yeah, no, financial independence is definitely important. It just doesn't save you from racism and white supremacy, if that makes sense. Great question, though.
Rudine, please, and then John Lawrence, I see you. Rudine, you're muted. You're muted. Rudine, you're muted if you can hear me. Uh-oh, Rudine.
I'm moved. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay.
There you go.
No, I was saying it was an excellent program and wonderful questions, and you answered them very, very well. I'm very excited to read the book. I haven't gotten it yet, but I'll get it when I get off the program.
Please, everyone, please buy the book. Please buy the book.
Amazing books.
Sounds like an amazing book. It really does. And I'm going to read it too. I just wanted to know that the fact that the 3 officers were convicted of violating Brother George Foreman's rights.
George Floyd.
Right, his rights. You think that will have any effect? Because I'm referring to, you were saying that the Black woman police person said you can't really interfere or whatever.
So,
I just want your thoughts on that.
Oh, no, fantastic question. So I have a chapter, about George Floyd, and
Floyd.
I interviewed a NBA player by the name of Steven Jackson, who knew him personally. So they were close friends, and so after George Floyd was killed, he went on this big, all over the country, using his platform, protests and everything like that. So what he said in the interview was, if it wasn't for a sister by the name of Darnella Frazier whipping out her cell phone.
Yes, it would never happen.
A young woman.
Right, young sister. We would have never heard of George Floyd.
Exactly.
So the police had already filed the report, and they showed what the actual report was. They didn't say that Derek Chauvin kneeled on his neck for 9 minutes. It didn't say any of that. It just said he died while resisting arrest, and it was done with. But then it was after the video came out that the young sister whipped out, and then they had to go back and open everything back up. And that's really the power of social media, because you capture things that have happened that are misreported by the police, but they're accepted as truth once the media reports what their misreporting is. You know what I mean? So if the media reports, well, the police said he had a gun, over, next thing. You know what I mean? But then somebody has a video, wait, there was no gun. There was no anything like that. Then that opens everything. So it's tough, because that case showed you how, it didn't necessarily show me that there was, a bright spot or a positive way to look at it in the future. It's more that we need to make sure that we watch the police more. That's what it told me. Exactly. You know what I mean? Because they would have gotten away with it if she didn't have her cell phone.
Exactly.
This is anybody, a question from the
John and Ben are next, but please, Ms. Robinson, you had a question. You wanted to jump in real quick?
When it said in your book, Mrs. Pruitt, you said, police officers, you have the power to take someone's freedom, their lives, give them a criminal record, so they will have a difficult time navigating through life. That's a lot of power. And when you were talking to her, that's what she said to you in your interview with her. And I thought that was very interesting, because they do. You can't go to law school, you can't get a job because you have a police record for some misdemeanor, but they have that power over you.
That's right.
John, then Ben, please.
Is that the police brutality you described as grounded in a brutally unequal capitalist society? And I was wondering if you have thoughts on how we as progressives can build the broad-based coalition necessary to build to implement and press for really substantive change in our system.
I think that the civilian review boards have been really successful in a lot of different cases. Dealing with Emerald Gardner in New York, daughter of Eric Garner, the only reason why Daniel Pantaleo was eventually fired after 5 years was because of the civilian review board. And people getting involved in that. Now, other places like Oklahoma, they're resistant to the civilian review board. They only want the police to review what police misconduct or accusations of misconduct. So it depends on where you are. I do a lot of work with Tiffany Crutcher, who is Terrence Crutcher's sister, who was killed by the police in Oklahoma, and she talks about she wishes they had civilian review boards in Tulsa the way that they had in New York. But that is a very effective way to be able to push for people to get involved.
Ben, please. How are you?
I'm good. Good to be here. John, I was blown away by your comments and your book, and you sold me. I bought one already. I bought it online while I was listening to you.
Thank you.
So, and it was interesting to hear so much talk about how qualified immunity is one of the basis of the problem. And so, Jerry and I are the co-chairs of the national campaign to end qualified immunity, and we're working in a few states. One of them is New York State. And so this is happening right now in the legislature, and I'm just wondering if you're aware. I'm in Vermont, so I'm not really in the nitty-gritty there in New York, and I'm just wondering if you're aware of other people or entities that we can kind of bring into the fold and have a better chance of getting it through the legislature.
So I just interviewed civil rights attorney Lee Merritt, who is running for AG in Texas. He has an uphill battle, but he's running for AG in Texas. And he talks about, we talked about qualified immunity. He talked about, police accountability and what keeps police accountability from happening. So he would be someone definitely to be able to connect with. The problem is that when we allow and it's not even allowing, it's just they do a good job of weaponizing language, the right. They do a great job of it. They'll take a term and twist it and have it mean something completely different, where the public will think that term means that you are anti-police, or you don't want the police, or you're encouraging violence. It is amazing how that happens, but it has to be done, through law. And because if the law allows you to get away, it's like, okay, so I have 3 children. Love my 3 children. But if I told them you could do whatever you want to do, stay up as late as you want to stay, eat whatever you want to eat, and you're not going to be punished for it, what's going to happen? You know what I mean? And so it's not a big surprise when you have police do these different things, because they're allowed to. So really changing the laws to hold them accountable is everything. And qualified immunity is the main thing. So that should be a sticking point when you hear different politicians from the left say that they want police reform. That has to be the first thing. So where are you in pushing for qualified immunity? Because anything else is just window dressing. Anything else is just you're just talking. But that's the first thing that has to be first on the list. And unfortunately, you see some people, I don't know if you want to call them centralists or the moderate left or whatever term, they are allowing the weaponizing of words from the right to dictate their stances. And they need to be called out on that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Brother Ben. And are there any other questions? We have about 14 minutes left. If not, I can jump in with another question for Etan. Where do we go?
There is one question, and I guess it's already been answered, from Jackie and Henry Forsheim. Do you see that? Kevin? It
Oh,
just
yeah,
said,
yeah,
can the
yeah.
end of qualified, that, I guess that's what we were talking about though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what we're
yeah.
talking about. Mhm.
Jackie and Henry, do you have another question? Do you all have another question? Can you unmute?
You want to unmute yourself, Jackie?
Can't do it. Oh, hey, no, so who shall we contact to, would it be our city council? Would it be the mayor? We're in New York City, we're in Brooklyn.
Shout out to
To
Brooklyn.
push for the end to qualified immunity.
Well, it would be all the above. The issue, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but with Eric Adams coming in, it kind of made his allegiance with the NYPD, and they're supporting him, and that's something that the NYPD has, gone on record saying that they didn't necessarily want. So that might be an uphill battle for his term, and that's the issue of having alliances. It's not always about. A lot of times you say, okay, we need a black mayor. Like, that's not always what we need. We need somebody who's in alliance with the right politics. Because, we had Clarence Thomas as I'm going off on topic, but yeah, what I'm saying is that it's more, it's more about being aligned with, what's right than the color of the person's skin, because that the two don't always match.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
David,
David Jones.
Yeah. Yes. The whole concept of punishment versus rehabilitation is for me where I struggle. The object of the game is that when you take somebody out of the process, when you bring them back in, they have to come back in only, conforming more to the normal mores or whatever. It's like you mentioned, Etan, that if your kids were allowed to run amok, they'd have to have punishment as a source of deterrence. And I guess I have difficulty with that, since what we're trying to build is a world that doesn't operate on the punishment principle, a world that operates on, negotiation and other techniques, So that's not a criticism. I'm just putting.
No. I definitely understand it, and in theory, I would love for that to be the world. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with the police and you're dealing with police brutality, the only thing that is responded to is punishment. The only thing responding to, if one police officer is held accountable for something, then that would be a deterrence. It's not a matter of
that. Yeah.
And so if police officers know what's right for wrong, they know that it's wrong to kill somebody or stand on, kneel on their neck for 90 minutes until but they do it. So you have to have checks and balances. You have to have people being held accountable, for that. So if a person breaks the law, if a regular citizen, kills someone, they're sent to jail. The same thing has to happen to a police officer if they kill someone. But right now, it's like the rules don't apply to them. So you can't have a system where, the rules apply to one person, but not the other person, because then the other person is going to do whatever they want to do. And that's the system that we have now.
I totally get it. I just have this question about raising our youngsters with like my kids would say something like, I got a spanking and it didn't mean much. I don't want them to think that they can buy grace from the church, or they can just go off and do anything that they wish to, and there's punishment, and you either accept it or you avoid it or whatnot. And where the police are concerned, having done that kind of a job, I'm just saying that I know that what police are, and we really do have to have them conform to a community standard that applies to us all. If your kid's going to get shaken down when you walk down the street, you're going to have a different point of view about it. Their whole issue, this country was built on racism. So that's what we got to confront, the fundamental racism, systemic. So with that, I'll
that was great points. One of the things that one of the officers talked about in the book as being something that should be implemented is that when a police officer does something, that it's not the city that pays for it, it comes out of the policeman's pension. It comes out of, they have their own insurance or their own license, and their license can be lost if they are convicted of doing something wrong. So those are all checks and balances or punishments, you know what I mean, to say that if you do this, you can lose your license. Like any job in America, if you do something wrong, you don't get to keep your job. That's just the way the setup is. You can work at McDonald's. If you mess up everything, you will be fired from McDonald's. But the police have a different type of a thing in place where they're protected even if they mess up. And if they are fired, they move right to the next precinct and get rehired again. That's just a bad setup. That's just a bad setup.
But that's something they're changing the law in New York State. And that's one of the things that's coming about. And we have to lobby our state senators and talk to our assembly persons. We cannot just talk here about it. We've got to go to them and make sure they understand that. That's peace demands action. So that's something we can do. I know that when I went to speak to the commissioner in Yonkers, and he said, yes, they're working on that so that if you are commit misconduct in one police department, you can't go from here to another because that's what happens. And that's something we can stop. And we have somebody in government that believes in that and who has the power to make sure possibly that law can become a reality. So we've got to lobby and let them know. Politicians don't dance by themselves. They dance when the people make them dance.
That's right. Very well said.
And I thank you very much for an incredible, interesting evening of questions and education. And your book is very, very inspirational. And I hope that you all go out, Kasich, Etan, I apologize, that you go out, and just as Ben Cohen, while he was sitting here, he was right on the money. He got the book. And you too can read it for yourself and see exactly when you see Alcindor, the woman from Haiti, and all the different commentators. It's a fabulous book. It will really educate you on how people look at the police department. Many of you know, but those of you who are not so aware, you will get an education by reading it. Thank you so much.
Are we wrapping up, Ms. Robinson, or do we have time for one more?
Yes, are there any more questions?
Well, it's kind of time to wrap up and say our thank yous, Joanne, I think.
All right.
And you had a couple of announcements.
Yes, I do. And I'd like to thank Kevin and Etan for a very introspective evening and it's education for all of us. And I would also like to make a special shout out to Professor Ntandi and his lovely wife for insisting us in selecting our guests for this evening. If it were not for Professor Ntandi, we would not have met all these wonderful people. And he's like our godfather, like the late Robert Schaefer was our godfather in finding interesting people to have on our programs. And I would also like to keep you in touch this coming month. We have a trivia night on instead of the 30th, I think it's going to be on the 31st. Get your tickets, get on one of those teams, and it's our own Double Jeopardy. Peace Action's Double Jeopardy, the trivia night. It'll have really fun. We've got it's intergenerational, it's the alumni, Peace Action, it's the people, it's all of you. So buy a ticket, get on one of those teams and see who's going to be the winner. And the second thing that's going on in March is the Emmett Till Opera. It makes its premiere presentation, and we have benefit tickets for it, for the opera. And it's really incredible when you think of the gut-wrenching story of Emmett Till and to see it. And the opera is the music is just very thrilling. So I hope you will buy tickets for it. That's coming up the 23rd of March. It's going to be at the John Jay College, Gerald Lynch Theater on 59th Street. And you have two things, the 31st for the trivia, see who will be the trivia king or queen, and come to the choral premiere presentation of the opera Emmett Till. So see you in March, and thank you all for coming and helping us build a culture of peace. helping us with your finances to keep our student chapters going, to be able to bring programs like this to you that are informative, that are exciting, and to see these young performers, as you saw tonight, just on a spot for the next stop. And we have so much more for you to visit us. So if you're new, come back. See you in March. And thank you again. I'd like to thank the fundraising committee, Sally, our